Hello, I'm George Lee Cunningham. I'm here today with author Larry LaRue, who just released his new book, Major League Encounters. And I have to say, I'm not a big sports fan, but I read this book and it was delightful. I really enjoyed it. And you have these encounters in alphabetical order. And right from the beginning to the end, it was really interesting people in extraordinary situations. And it starts with Jim Abbott, and who was a one-handed pitcher who started with the Anaheim Angels.
Right.
And can you tell them a little about Jim Abbott?
Jim was a man who had no business being a good player at anything, because he was born with a defect, a hand that just, was very short, very small, virtually useless in sports. And he became a left-handed quarterback in college. He was a high school star who went on to college and then was signed as a major league pitcher. And he would wear a glove on his bad hand by just laying it across his arm, make the pitch, and then put his pitching hand into the glove and be ready for defense. If he caught the ball, he had to, again, put the glove on the hand that didn't help him, take the ball out and throw it. Teams tried to bunt on him to see if he could make the transition, and he did. Anything he wanted to do, Jim Abbott did. And he was a sensation as a story, because no one had ever quite seen anything quite like this. And all the interviews, he was in Time magazine, he was in People magazine, and before he'd thrown a pitch, he was one of the more famous pitchers in the year in the league that year.
And he got kind of, as you say in your book, he got kind of tired of that being the main thing people concentrated, focused on.
Yeah, he knew he was an inspiration to people with similar disabilities, and he appreciated that. But he wanted to be known as a pitcher, not as a one-handed pitcher. And eventually he was. He threw a no-hitter as a New York Yankee at one point.
Wow.
And, when he retired, he had become a good left-handed pitcher, and everything else was rather secondary.
Yeah, so that's amazing. I know the last person in the book, of course, was Tiger Woods, Tiger Woods. And he's not a baseball player at all. But the little vignette you have is really about the reaction of the ball players to Tiger Woods when he shows up one day just to practice with them as kind of a friend of one of the players.
He came to the Seattle Mariners Minnesota Twins game as a friend of Ken Griffey Jr. and wanted to take batting practice. And players are very cynical. They don't look at popularity, they don't look at fame as a big deal, because they accept that they are famous and that they are beloved by many people. But when Tiger Woods came into the clubhouse, they were in awe. All of them try to play golf. All of them are fairly bad at it. And here was probably the world's greatest golfer that came in and put on a uniform and went out to the field with them to try to hit a baseball. So when he was in the cage taking batting practice, everybody on the field and in the ballpark was watching Tiger Woods. And he couldn't hit a ball in the air. He just hitting ground ball after ground ball. And they were sort of delighted that he wasn't very good at their game, since they knew they weren't very good at his.
And one of the most touching stories in there, I think, that I really loved, was when you got a chance to talk to Willie Mays, and this is long after his retirement from ball, and you happened to catch him at Candlestick Park in San Francisco.
No, I didn't.
Where was it then?
It was in spring training in Arizona.
Okay.
And he was working with a bunch of kids, and all they knew about him was that he was Willie Mays, and that was enough, because Willie is probably as famous as any ball player who ever played. And he was 57 years old at the time, and he was showing them how to slide. He'd run to the base, slide, tear up his pants, tear up his knee, and he was having a blast. And the kids were having a lot of fun watching Willie Mays show them how to slide. We had an interview scheduled after that, and we went over to a little park bench, or a picnic table, and he sat up on the table, and we started talking. And Willie was telling about stories, about friends, about people in baseball, Sandy Koufax, Bob Gibson, and all of a sudden I noticed people who were in the park had kind of gathered around us just to listen to Willie tell these stories. And pretty soon there were about 25 people sitting around, and we just kept going. They never interrupted, they never bothered us at all. And when I finished, Willie started to stand up, and everybody stood up and gave him a standing ovation, which was, I thought, an indication of just what Willie Mays meant to baseball and to the people who love it.
And in between these, and the other people in there, you've mentioned Brian Downing, who wasn't even on his high school team, but through sheer determination made it to the major leagues and was there for several years and had a successful career.
Brian Downing in high school rather than make his team, which he didn't think he could, would lay out with a hose in his backyard a little diamond, and then he'd use a stick and a bottle cap, and he'd play baseball. And he'd announce his own game as he ran around the hose. From there, he went to a major league ball player through sheer determination. And he stayed around to have 2,000 hits, in Major League Baseball, which is not Hall of Fame, but for a guy who was playing with his hose in the backyard, it is sort of amazing.
Well, you talk about, it says run in families. There are baseball families. You had a couple of families in there that had been 3 generations in baseball. There was the grandfather and the father and the son who had all played baseball at various times in their career. And one of the funniest ones was the Boone family. And you had Bret Boone, it was Bob Boone, wasn't it?
Right.
Bret Boone, who was the Boone.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Brett was the son of Bob Boone, who had been a major league catcher, and the grandson of Ray Boone, who had been a player in the 40s and 50s. So he came to the major leagues, not awed by anything. He'd been in clubhouses his whole young life. So when he got to the big leagues, he just sort of had expected to be there. And late in his career, he was traded to the Seattle Mariners. And his career turned around because he took on a persona that no one else had had, and he became the Boone. Nobody called him Brett. Nobody called him Boone. He was the Boone. And he would start telling stories. He would talk to people. He would run through the clubhouse wearing chaps and nothing else. And he'd get on the plane and put a towel around his neck like a cape and say he was the Super Boone. And he'd run up and down the aisle. He was one of the funniest players I'd ever been around. And yet, didn't mind making fun of himself, which made him hugely popular.
Yeah.
And at the end of his career, he'd left the Seattle Mariners and signed with the Minnesota Twins. And he wasn't the Boone there. He was just another player named Brett. And he just didn't have the heart to keep playing. He'd loved his role in Seattle. He'd loved his long career. But at the end of it, he just had no more heart to play it. So the Boone retired.
The Boone retired. This is a fascinating book. And I heartily, encourage anybody who's interested in baseball, who's not interested in baseball, to read it, because you're going to enjoy this book. It's got the real inside story, what it's like in the major leagues. And thank you, Larry LaRue, for being here with us today.
Thank you.